Hey everyone, Happy New Year. Hope you've been having a great holiday season. Today I wanted to talk about using photography terms in your prompts. Now, there's a lot of debate whether it works or not. There's definitely some truth on both sides, but today I wanted to focus specifically on three aspects of using photography terms. So what you see on the screen now is an image of April that I took from a shoot this past summer. And I used a lens called the Helios 44-2. It's a 58mm lens, and it's known for a specific characteristic giving you almost a radial blur in the background. It has kind of this swirly bokeh, and bokeh is just the background blur. So I first started testing out this concept of using photography terms with a Canon 1DX MK3 and a Canon 50mm 1.2. I put some emphasis on the lens by adding brackets, and this works in automatic 1111. I don't think it works in, say, Playground AI, for example, but this is a way where you can add emphasis on your prompt. Now I want you to pay attention to the background. This particular lens at 1.2 is going to give you a very narrow depth of field, and the results will give you this nice blurry background and a little bit in the foreground. Let's look at this image, same type of results, but you'll notice it doesn't have that swirly effect, right? Now, does it matter that it's Canon, Nikon, or Sony? Not necessarily. I don't think there's enough unique differences between those lenses where you can say, yeah, it makes a huge difference. But I also notice once in a while I would get that particular swirly bokeh look with this prompt. And I think the reason why I would get it every now and then is because 30, 35, and 50mm is a very common focal length for vintage lenses. Vintage lenses in general tend to have a little bit of that swirly background look as well. But in order for you to get that look more consistently, I found that when you add Helios 44-2, 58mm, the chances of you getting that look is greater. Now, the other thing I discovered too, it depends on the model you're using. What I showed you previously was a standard 1.5 stable diffusion model. So I thought, let me test out the analog diffusion model and see if I can get the same result without using the Helios lens. So let's take a look at some of the analog style images. We kind of see a little bit of that effect, but not as drastic. This image, we don't see it at all. Although I love the analog look, it's got that nice vintage feel, it still doesn't really have that background we're looking for. However, in this image, we see little traces of it. We do see that it does have some characteristics of the Helios. And again, this is very common for vintage lenses, that vintage style. But for the most part, looking at some of these images, you don't really see that same effect, right? So with the same analog diffusion model, I put in Helios 44-2, 58mm, and as we look at the examples here, especially in the corners, you start to see this radial blur effect. This image especially, since it's more busier. The quality of the face of this image isn't that great, but we do see evidence of that effect here, right? Here's another one that I quite like, but it still has that nice soft vintage look as well. So this really led me to believe that the model has a lot to do with this. In this series of images, I'm using a trained model that I did of April using OpenAI's photo booth. And there were a couple of images like the one I showed you in the beginning that I used for training. And I found by doing this, I can get that same effect more often than what I was doing previously. So let's say out of 10 renders, I might get 5 or 6 images with this unique look. As opposed to using the regular stable diffusion model, I might get 2 or 3 images with this look out of 10. In this image, you can see it even more so. So you see it's got this exaggerated radial blur look, which is quite unique. In this image, the face needs some work and so do the hands, but again, you can really see that effect in this image. In this image, you can see it a little bit only because there's not much variance in the background, so it's not that evident. This was one of the images where it really didn't pick up the characteristics, mostly because of the composition, the distance from the background and what's in the foreground. I just liked the image. It looked really good. But you see the characteristics of the Helios here wrapping around the subject. Even more so here, even though the face and the hands are kind of janky. But again, evidence of this unique characteristic. Here's another image where it's very obvious. I really like how this one looks as well. Here's one of the shots that was rendered that didn't have the effect. And I think I ran 10 images for this batch, and this was maybe one of 3 that didn't have that effect. Now the next thing I want to talk about is something called bokeh. Bokeh is the background blur you see in this image. And when you have lights or reflective things in the background, typically it's going to create what's called bokeh balls. What makes it unique, again, is the Helios lens giving it this swirly effect. If we look at this image, we see the same thing. And you'll notice that the bokeh balls are more circular towards the center. And as we get towards the corners, they're more oval. As we saw in this example where it didn't work, this is typically how those bokeh balls are going to look. They're going to look nice and round. So in the prompt, all I did was add city at night background, comma, bokeh balls to get this effect. Just remember, context is everything. If you put bokeh balls and then your background is the beach, chances are you may not get that result. So you want to make sure that you're using these words in the right context. The next lens type I want to talk about is the fisheye lens. And the fisheye lens gives you kind of a warped perspective. In the prompt, I emphasized 8mm Lens Baby. That's a company that makes fisheye lenses. Probably not necessary, but I put it in there again just to kind of enhance the effect. And fisheye lens. I also emphasized it with the brackets so that we put more weight on that word. Let's look at some of the examples here. If we look at the sides, you see this distorted look. That's what the fisheye lens does. It gives you kind of a wrapped around perspective. Here's one where everything looks like it's in motion. Here's a low perspective one. Again, you'll notice the buildings kind of bending here at the sides. Really love this perspective. This one also looks like it's kind of turning the corner. Everything is in motion, which looks great. This one's just a tad more subtle, but you do see the bending on the sides here. And typically you're going to get kind of an over-exaggerated front view. Things may look a bit wider than what they actually are. Here's another front view example. So I know those were 3 quick examples, but you can clearly see that these particular words work in the images based on the context. Now, whether f2 or f8, 1/500, 1/250 matters, I don't think it does. I'm still doing my own tests for that, but so far I can tell you it's more noise if anything. It may help to enhance the prompt depending on the context, but you're better off in explaining things in specific words or defining a specific characteristic of that camera or lens. Otherwise, there really isn't much difference between Canon and Nikon, for example. So let me know in the comments below what photography terms have worked for you. Like you, I'm still learning myself about this. I'm learning a lot of what works for me, but there's still so much to discover. And the whole photography term concept, that's a big can of worms, but I'll definitely share my results with you. Now, if you happen to be a photographer or aspiring photographer wanting to use AI for your work, make sure to check out this video where I demo how to change certain aspects of the image using Stable Diffusion. In the meantime, my friends, as always, I'll see you when I see you.